My son looked me in the eyes and said, "Sign the papers, Dad, it's time to retire." And I did, but not in the way he expected. I'm 75 years old. My name is Rick Donovan, and I'm sitting in my home office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, looking at a photograph on my desk. It's from 1978, me standing in front of a rust-streaked machine shop, 27 years old, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots, holding a wrench like it was a sword. That was the beginning of Donovan Industries. About 3 years and 3 months ago, my son Marcus called me, not to check how I was doing, not to ask about my health or talk about his kids. He said he needed an urgent family meeting about the company's future. The tone in his voice was wrong, cold, transactional, like I was a vendor he needed to renegotiate terms with. I built that company from absolutely nothing. 48 years of sweat, strategy, and steel. Started with a $3,000 loan and a dream that most people thought was foolish. Grew it into a $50 million manufacturing empire. Precision parts for aerospace, automotive, defense contractors, 400 employees, 3 facilities across Pennsylvania and Ohio. I taught Marcus everything. Brought him into the business when he was 12 years old, let him sweep floors and watch me negotiate contracts, paid for his education, made him president when he turned 35, groomed him to take over when the time was right. I thought blood meant something. I thought legacy mattered. Before we go further, do me a favor. If you've ever built something from nothing, if you've ever trusted someone completely, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a warning about what happens when the people closest to you decide you're no longer useful. That phone call 3 years ago, that was the beginning of the end. Or so Marcus thought. See, retirement isn't always voluntary. Sometimes the people you sacrificed everything for decide it's time for you to step aside. Sometimes they don't ask, they tell. And sometimes your biggest mistakes don't come from strangers or competitors. Sometimes they wear a familiar face. Sometimes they call you Dad. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. How my own son tried to push me out of the company I built with my bare hands. How he underestimated the man who taught him everything he knows, and how I made sure that when I finally did sign those papers, it was on my terms, not his. This is a story about trust and betrayal, about fathers and sons, about what happens when ambition becomes greed, and when someone forgets that the person they're trying to outmaneuver invented the playbook they're reading from. It starts 48 years ago. In a machine shop that smelled like oil and desperation. I didn't inherit a single dollar. Every brick in that building, every machine on that floor, came from decisions I made when failure meant losing everything. 1978. I was 27 years old with a pregnant wife, a mortgage I could barely afford, and a belief that if I could just get my hands on the right equipment, I could build something real. I borrowed $3,000 from a credit union, the kind of loan where they make you feel like you're asking for charity. Rented a 200-square-foot machine shop in Pittsburgh's Rust Belt, in a neighborhood where half the buildings were abandoned and the other half probably should have been. That first year, I worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, slept on a cot in the corner of the shop because driving home meant wasting time I didn't have. My wife Sarah brought me dinner in Tupperware containers and kissed me goodnight in a room that reeked of metal shavings and cutting oil. I landed my first major contract through pure persistence, showed up at an automotive parts supplier's office every single day for 2 weeks, until the purchasing manager agreed to see my samples just to make me go away. When he tested them and saw the precision, saw that I could deliver quality at a fair price, he gave me a shot. That contract saved me. By 1982, I had 5 employees. By 1985, 12. We survived the recession that killed half the manufacturers in Pennsylvania. Survived because I was financially conservative, because I never over-leveraged, because I treated my workers fairly, And they stayed loyal when times got hard. In 1990, I expanded into aerospace components. That required new certifications, new equipment, a level of precision that most small shops couldn't touch. I spent 6 months learning CAD/CAM programming at night school, then taught my senior machinists. We became one of the few shops in the region that could meet aerospace tolerances. By 2000, Donovan Industries employed 400 people across 3 facilities. We had contracts with Boeing, Lockheed, Ford, General Motors. Our reputation was built on one simple principle. We delivered what we promised, when we promised it, at the quality we promised. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive expensive cars or wear expensive suits. I showed up every morning at 6 a.m., walked the factory floor, and knew every employee by name. I believed in meticulous planning, in understanding every detail of the operation, in making decisions based on data rather than ego. My employees called me Mr. Donovan, but they respected me. When their kids graduated, I went to their parties. When they had medical emergencies, the company helped. That's how you build something that lasts. You take care of people, and they take care of you. Marcus was born in late 1978, right after I opened that first shop. He started coming to the factory when he was 12, 1990, when we were expanding into aerospace. I'd bring him on Saturdays, let him watch the machines, explain how each component fit into a larger system. I taught him to read blueprints, to understand tolerances, and to respect the craft. I wanted him to understand that success isn't magic. It's planning, discipline, and respecting the fundamentals. He learned fast, asked smart questions. I was proud. I thought I was building something we'd share, a legacy, something that would carry the Donovan name long after I was gone. I thought he understood what it took to build something real. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I wasn't wrong about how to run a business. That would matter later, in ways Marcus never anticipated. I told myself every father has to let go eventually. I just didn't realize letting go and being pushed out are 2 completely different things. Marcus graduated from Wharton with his MBA in 2005, top 15% of his class. I was there at graduation, sitting in that auditorium, feeling like every sacrifice had been worth it. My son had advantages I never had: education, connections, a foundation to build on. He spent 5 years at McKinsey, learning corporate strategy, working with Fortune 500 companies. I thought that experience would make him sharp, would give him tools I never had access to. When he came back to Donovan Industries in 2010 at age 32, I believed he was ready to help take the company to the next level. I made him VP of Operations at 35 in 2013, President at 37 in 2015. I watched him present to the board, confident, articulate, using business terminology that sometimes went over my head. I watched him negotiate contracts with executives half his age, talking their language, modernizing our systems. He brought in enterprise software, updated our supply chain management, and hired consultants to streamline operations. I was proud. I wanted to believe this was natural evolution, that every generation builds on what the previous one created. He married Vanessa when he was 34 in 2012, a woman with an MBA from Columbia, sharp as a knife, always perfectly dressed, always saying the right things at company events. She smiled at me across the Thanksgiving table and called me Dad, but her eyes were calculating, measuring. I noticed small things, comments Vanessa would make about my outdated leadership style, suggestions that maybe I should enjoy my golden years instead of working so hard, always said with a smile, always packaged as concern. Marcus started contradicting me in board meetings, not aggressively, just subtle disagreements about strategy, about risk tolerance, about whether we should expand faster, leverage more debt, chase higher margin contracts that I considered too risky. He'd use phrases like industry best practices and what the data shows in a tone that suggested my decades of experience were quaint but irrelevant. I told myself this was a generational difference, that young executives are taught to question everything, to challenge assumptions. I'd built the company on careful, conservative growth. Maybe his aggressive approach was just a different path to the same destination. The board started changing too. Marcus brought in outside directors, his connections from business school, consultants, a venture capital friend, people who'd never worked in manufacturing, who talked about unlocking value and strategic repositioning. In meetings, they'd reference studies I'd never heard of, frameworks with acronyms I didn't recognize. I started to feel like a visitor in my own company, but he was my son, blood, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, the reason I'd worked those 16-hour days, missed Little League games, postponed vacations. I built Donovan Industries for him, so I ignored my instinct, that voice in my head that said something was wrong, that the respect in his eyes had been replaced by impatience, that he looked at me the way you look at equipment that's past its useful life. I trusted blood over instinct. I thought about my own father, a factory worker who died at 63, never owning anything, never building anything that lasted. I'd promised myself my son would have more, that I'd give him opportunities, education, a foundation. I kept that promise. I gave him everything. I just didn't realize that for some people, everything is never enough. That phone call 3 years ago, the one where Marcus said we needed an urgent family meeting, that's when I finally understood what was happening. That's when I realized my son wasn't asking me to retire. He was telling me, and he'd already made plans that didn't include asking my permission. I walked into that boardroom expecting to discuss third quarter earnings. I walked out realizing my own son had spent months plotting to take everything I'd built. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in September 2023. I arrived 10 minutes early, like I always did, walked through the lobby of Donovan Industries headquarters, nodded to security, took the elevator to the 4th floor. Something felt wrong the moment I stepped into the conference room. Marcus was there. Vanessa sat beside him, laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard like a court stenographer. 3 board members, Richard Stokes, Jennifer Yamamoto, Thomas Brennan, occupied one side of the table, and David Fisher, a corporate attorney I'd never met, sat at the head with a stack of documents. Nobody smiled. Nobody made eye contact. This wasn't a quarterly review. This was an execution. Marcus stood. He'd rehearsed this. I could tell by the way he positioned his body, the way he cleared his throat, the way he looked just past my shoulder instead of into my eyes. Dad, thank you for coming. We need to discuss some serious concerns about your capacity to continue leading this organization. Capacity, not performance, not strategy. Capacity, like I was a machine that had worn out. He continued, professional, detached, using words I knew he'd practiced with Vanessa, probably in front of a mirror. The board has documented several instances of concerning behavior, missed meetings, erratic decision-making, financial irregularities that suggest diminished cognitive function. I started to object. He held up his hand. We have documentation, medical assessments, meeting minutes, email chains. The evidence is comprehensive. David Fisher slid a 3-inch binder across the table. My name was on the cover. Retirement transition plan, Richard Donovan. Marcus kept talking about fiduciary duty, shareholder interests, smooth transition, generous retirement package, how this was best for everyone, including me. The board members stared at their hands. Jennifer had been with us for 12 years, Richard for 8. They wouldn't look at me. Vanessa typed steadily, recording everything. Her face was blank, efficient. I opened the binder. Page after page of lies dressed up in official language. Psychological evaluations I'd never taken. Meeting minutes describing decisions I'd never made. Financial reports with selective data, numbers stripped of context, presented to suggest incompetence. My hands started shaking, not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like my chest was going to split open. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to tie his shoes, to swing a bat, to read a balance sheet, the young man I'd paid $250,000 to educate, the executive I'd groomed to lead. He'd spent months building a case against me, recruited board members, hired attorneys, fabricated evidence, and he sat there using corporate buzzwords like stakeholder value and succession planning to cloak what this actually was: a coup. Marcus slid a pen across the table. "The retirement package is fair, Dad. More than fair. You'll be financially secure. You can finally rest. Enjoy your golden years." The way he said "Dad" made my stomach turn. It sounded like an insult. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Searched for some hint of the boy who used to ask me to explain how gears worked, who used to sit in my office and draw pictures while I took calls. He was gone, or maybe he'd never existed the way I remembered. The man across from me was a stranger wearing my son's face, and he thought he'd already won. Every lie was documented, every accusation supported by fabricated evidence. My son had turned my company into a weapon designed to destroy me. I read every page of that binder while they watched. The first section contained medical assessments. 2 psychologists I'd never heard of had supposedly evaluated me over 6 sessions. Their conclusion: early-stage cognitive decline consistent with age-related dementia. Recommended immediate cessation of executive duties. I'd never met either psychologist. Never scheduled any evaluation. The signatures on the consent forms weren't mine. Close, but not quite right. Marcus had forged my signature. The second section was meeting minutes from the past 18 months. According to these documents, I'd made increasingly erratic decisions, approved contracts without proper vetting, contradicted myself in consecutive meetings, forgotten key financial details, behaved unprofessionally with clients. All lies, but someone had been very careful. They'd taken real meetings and twisted the details just enough, changed what I'd actually said, attributed decisions to me that Marcus had made. The dates were real. The attendees were real. The content was fiction. The third section was financial. Charts showing cash flow irregularities, expense reports with highlighted entries, personal charges to company accounts, unexplained withdrawals, questionable vendor payments. I recognized maybe 1 in 10 of these transactions. The rest were fabricated or reassigned from other budget lines. Someone with accounting access had built a forensic trail designed to suggest either corruption or incompetence. The fourth section was email chains, board members expressing concerns about my leadership. Marcus responded professionally, saying he'd monitor the situation and document everything for fiduciary protection. The emails showed that Richard Stokes had been promised an additional 2% equity stake after the transition. Jennifer Yamamoto would receive a board chairmanship and $50,000 annual stipend increase. Thomas Brennan's son would get a VP position in the new structure. Vanessa was promised COO title and a seat on the board. They'd all been bought. The retirement package itself was elegant in its cruelty. I'd receive $2.5 million over 10 years. Sounds generous until you realize I'd built a $50 million company. I'd keep a chairman emeritus title with no voting rights, no board seat, no operational authority. All my shares would transfer to a voting trust controlled by Marcus. Everything I'd built would become his. My name would stay on the building like a memorial to something dead. I looked up from the documents. Marcus was watching me with an expression I'd seen before, the same look he had when he closed a difficult negotiation. Pride, confidence, the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. He'd learned from me. I'd taught him to prepare for every contingency, to document everything, to build airtight legal frameworks before making a move. He'd studied me, identified my weakness, my trust in him, my assumption that blood meant loyalty. Then he'd recruited accomplices, bought them with my company's equity, used their credibility to build a narrative of my incompetence. He'd fabricated evidence that would hold up under casual scrutiny, hired real professionals who'd testify if needed, created a paper trail that painted me as either senile or corrupt. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd turned 48 years of my business philosophy into weapons aimed at my throat. The sophistication was impressive. The planning is meticulous. The execution was ruthless. I'd taught him well. Too well. David Fisher cleared his throat. "Mr. Donovan, we need your signature on these documents." The board has voted to accept your retirement effective immediately. You can sign voluntarily, or will be forced to pursue involuntary removal through the mechanisms outlined in the corporate bylaws. Marcus leaned forward. Dad, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at my son, at the board members who'd sold their integrity for money and titles, at Vanessa with her cold efficiency, at David Fisher with his rehearsed legal threats. And I made a decision. I signed those papers with a shaking hand and defeated posture, because sometimes the best move in chess is letting your opponent think they've won. I had two choices at that moment. I could fight, stand up, call them liars, threaten lawsuits, make a scene. It would feel good for about 60 seconds. Then David Fisher would activate whatever legal machinery they'd prepared. The board would vote. I'd be escorted out by security, probably that same day. They'd paint me as an unstable old man who couldn't accept reality. Or I could play a different game entirely. I let the binder slip from my hands, let it hit the table with a thud that sounded like defeat. I looked at Marcus with confusion in my eyes. Let my voice shake when I speak. I don't understand. I've been doing my best. The company is profitable. Our contracts are solid. I know, Dad. Marcus used his patient voice, the one you'd use with a child. But it's time. You've earned your rest. I picked up the pen. Let my hand tremble, put it down, picked it up again. This is really happening? It's what's best, Vanessa said. First time she'd spoken. Her voice was gentle, practiced. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to enjoy life. I nodded slowly, like I was trying to process something beyond my capacity to understand. I signed the first document, then the second, then the third. My signature was shaky, uncertain. Nothing like the bold hand I'd used to sign contracts for decades. Marcus's shoulders relaxed. I saw it happen. Saw him exchange a glance with Vanessa. Saw David Fisher make a small check mark on his legal pad. They believed it. I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back like my joints hurt. I looked around the boardroom like I was seeing it for the last time. Can I say goodbye to people on the factory floor? Of course, Marcus said. He stood and came around the table. Opened his arms for a hug. I let him embrace me. He patted my back twice. Efficient. Already thinking about his next meeting. I shuffled toward the door. Stopped. Turned back. You'll take care of the company? Keep things running the way we built them? Absolutely, Dad. You have my word. I nodded. I walked out. Took the elevator down alone. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 10 minutes. Let myself feel everything. The rage, the heartbreak, the humiliation of what my son had tried to do. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Harold Chen. Just 3 words. It's time. His response came back immediately. On it. See, what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd spent the last 5 years underestimating the man who built the company he wanted to steal, was that Harold had been reporting to me for months. Every board conversation, every private meeting, every piece of the plot Marcus thought was secret, Harold had documented all of it. When Marcus first started making moves in 2018, pushing Harold to retire, questioning his decisions in front of others, Harold came to me, not to complain, to warn me. We'd known each other for 43 years by then. He recognized what was happening before I wanted to believe it. So we made a plan. Harold stayed in place, pretended to be intimidated by Marcus, let my son think he was winning, and every week, over lunch at a diner 3 miles from the office, Harold told me everything. The fabricated medical reports, the forged signatures, the board members being bought, the timeline for the coup. I'd known this meeting was coming for 6 weeks. I'd known what papers they'd present, what lies they'd tell, what Marcus would say, and I'd prepared accordingly. That performance in the boardroom, that wasn't defeat. That was the opening move in a game Marcus didn't even know we were playing. He thought he'd checkmated me. He had no idea the board was bigger than he could see. Marcus thought he understood corporate structure because he went to Wharton, but I'd built a maze that would take his lawyers years to navigate, and by then, it would be too late. Let me explain what my son actually got when I signed those papers. On the surface, Donovan Industries looked straightforward. The corporate filings showed a standard structure. I owned 40% of the shares. Marcus owned 30%. The remaining 30% was distributed among board members and key employees. Marcus forced me to transfer my 40%. Combined with his 30% and the board members he'd bought, he thought he had controlling interest. But that's because he only looked at the surface. 15 years earlier, in 2008, right after Marcus joined the company, I sat down with Harold Chen and an attorney named Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but just as sharp. I told them I wanted to protect what I'd built, not from competitors, from the possibility that someday, someone close to me might try to take it. Call it paranoia, call it wisdom. I'd seen too many family businesses destroyed by the next generation. We created DI Holdings, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company. Delaware because their corporate law is the most developed in the country, and their courts understand complexity. DI Holdings owned 51% of Donovan Industries through a series of family trusts and investment vehicles. The ownership was structured through multiple layers, trusts within trusts, each with different beneficiaries and conditions. Only 3 people knew DI Holdings existed: me, Harold, and Elizabeth. The shares Marcus thought he was getting, those represented ownership in Donovan Industries, the operating company. But the actual control, the voting rights, the decision-making power that flowed through DI Holdings, it gets better. We created additional entities, shell companies but legal ones. DI Properties LLC owned the real estate, the factory buildings, the land, everything. Donovan IP Holdings owned all the patents, trademarks, and proprietary manufacturing processes. DI Equipment Leasing owned the actual machinery. Donovan Industries, the company that Marcus now controlled, it leased everything from entities I actually owned. The manufacturing floor he walked through feeling like a king, I owned the building. The machines he thought would make him rich, I owned those too. The proprietary processes that made our aerospace contracts profitable, I held those patents personally. Marcus had shares in a company that owned almost nothing without my consent. The paperwork he'd forced me to sign transferred my 40% stake in the operating company, but it didn't touch DI Holdings, didn't touch the trusts, didn't touch the real assets. I'd built this structure over 15 years. Every time we expanded, every time we bought new equipment, every time we developed new processes, Elizabeth made sure the actual ownership flowed through entities Marcus didn't know existed. It was completely legal, standard asset protection strategy, the kind of thing sophisticated business owners do to protect themselves from lawsuits, creditors, and yes, ungrateful children. Harold managed the finances in a way that made everything look normal on the surface. The operating company paid rent to DI Properties, paid licensing fees to IP Holdings, paid equipment leases to equipment leasing, all at fair market rates, all documented properly. To an outside observer, or to Marcus with his Wharton MBA, it just looked like standard corporate structure, cost centers, operating expenses. He never questioned it because why would he? His father had built it. It had always been that way. But what it actually meant was this. Marcus now owned shares in a company that couldn't operate without my permission, couldn't use its own equipment, couldn't manufacture using its own processes, couldn't even occupy its own buildings. He thought he'd stolen my empire. He'd actually taken control of an empty shell. And the beautiful part, he wouldn't realize it until he tried to actually run the company. That realization was coming soon. Harold Chen had been with me for 43 years, and when my own blood turned against me, it was Harold who proved what real family looks like. I met Harold in 1980, 6 months after Sarah and I lost our first child. I was drowning in grief and work, trying to keep the business alive while the world felt like it was ending. Harold had just immigrated from Taiwan. He was 25 years old with an accounting degree, limited English, and a work ethic that made mine look lazy. He'd answered an ad I'd placed for a part-time bookkeeper. I could barely afford 20 hours a week. He worked 60, never asked for overtime, just stayed late, organized files, learned our systems, fixed mistakes I didn't even know I'd made. When I tried to pay him more, He refused, said he was learning, and the education was worth more than money. We built Donovan Industries together. When I made Harold CFO in 1995, people questioned it. He wasn't flashy, didn't have an MBA from a prestigious school, but he understood every dollar that moved through that company, and more importantly, he understood loyalty. We'd survived 3 recessions together, celebrated our kids' graduations together, buried his wife when cancer took her in 2008, went fishing every April, just the 2 of us, talking about life and business and everything that mattered. When Marcus joined the company in 2010, Harold was cautious. He never said anything directly. That wasn't his way. But I noticed the careful way he answered Marcus's questions, the way he'd pause before agreeing with my son's suggestions. 5 years ago, in 2018, when Marcus was ramping up his plans, my son started pushing Harold to retire, called him outdated in a board meeting, suggested his conservative approach was holding the company back, implied that someone with more modern financial strategies should be CFO. Harold came to my office the next day, closed the door, sat down. "Your son is not what you think he is," he said quietly. I defended Marcus, made excuses, said he was just young, ambitious, trying to prove himself. Harold nodded, didn't argue, just said, "I will watch him carefully." And he did. For 5 years, Harold documented everything. Board meetings where Marcus manipulated numbers, private conversations where my son mocked me behind my back, plans discussed with Vanessa late at night when they thought Harold had gone home. Harold had access to everything: email servers, financial systems, meeting schedules. Marcus never thought to lock him out because who worries about a 68-year-old accountant who barely speaks up in meetings? Every week, Harold and I met for lunch at a diner called Rosie's, 3 miles from the office. He'd order the same thing every time: tuna melt and black coffee, and he'd tell me what Marcus was planning. The coded language we developed was simple. If Harold mentioned weather forecasts, it meant Marcus had held a private meeting. If he talked about inventory concerns, it meant financial manipulation. If he said he was thinking about retirement, it meant Marcus was accelerating his timeline. 6 weeks before the ambush meeting, Harold told me it was coming. "He has the votes," Harold said, stirring his coffee. "The board is bought. David Fisher has prepared documents. They will move soon." "What do they have on me?" I asked. Harold slid a folder across the table. Inside was everything: the fabricated medical assessments, the doctored meeting minutes, the false financial irregularities. He'd copied it all. "I am sorry," Harold said. "Sorry I could not stop this. Sorry your son became this." I put my hand on his. "You've given me exactly what I need." We'd spent 4 decades building something real. Harold had risked his job, his pension, his reputation to protect me. Marcus was his boss too. Harold could have stayed silent, retired quietly, taken whatever package Marcus offered. Instead, he'd chosen me, not because of blood, not because of obligation, because of 43 years of mutual respect, because of shared struggle and shared success, because he understood what Marcus never would. Loyalty isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Marcus thought family was everything. Harold taught me that sometimes family is just the people who show up when it matters. And Harold had shown up every single day. Elizabeth had built legal tripwires around every asset Marcus wanted, and he'd triggered all of them the moment he handed me those papers. I first met Elizabeth Warren in 1998 at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Pittsburgh. She was the keynote speaker, a corporate attorney who specialized in hostile takeover defense and succession planning. Her presentation was about family businesses and the legal structures that protect them from internal threats. I hired her the next week. Elizabeth had seen every variation of corporate betrayal: children pushing out parents, partners stealing from partners, boards staging coups. She'd defended companies from hostile takeovers, fought off shareholder lawsuits, and built legal fortresses that withstood everything from government investigations to family wars. She was expensive, worth every dollar. In 2008, When I made Marcus president of Donovan Industries, Elizabeth called me into her office. "Rick," she said, "I need you to think about something uncomfortable. What happens if your son tries to force you out?" I laughed, told her Marcus would never do that. He was loyal. He loved me. Elizabeth didn't smile. Every father I've worked with said exactly that. Then they sat in my office crying after their children stole everything they'd built. "I need you to let me implement safeguards. Hope you never need them, but have them in place." So we did. First, she created poison pill provisions, standard corporate defense mechanism, but tailored specifically for internal threats. The provisions stated that if anyone, including officers or directors, attempted to transfer control of the company without following specific procedures, their shares would automatically convert to non-voting preferred stock worth 10% of common shares. Marcus triggered that provision when he forced me to sign under duress. His shares, and the shares of every board member who participated, converted the moment those documents were filed. They didn't know it yet. It would take weeks for the legal paperwork to process through the system, but it was already done. Second, we established trigger clauses requiring unanimous board approval for any CEO change or corporate officer removal, not majority approval, unanimous. Marcus had bought 3 board members, but Donovan Industries had 7 board seats. Harold held 1. 2 others, William Garrett and Susan Chen, Harold's cousin, were people I'd put in place years ago, compensated through the shell companies Marcus didn't know about. Marcus didn't have unanimity. The votes he forced through weren't legally binding. Third, Elizabeth had built key man clauses into our most important contracts: the aerospace deals, the defense contracts, the automotive supply agreements. All of them required my personal guarantee and specified that the contracts couldn't be transferred or assigned without my written consent. Marcus couldn't fulfill those contracts without me, and the moment he tried, the clients would have legal grounds to void the agreements. She'd also established that certain equipment leases and real estate agreements required my personal signature for renewal. Those contracts were coming up for renewal in the next 6 months. Without me, Marcus couldn't legally operate the business he thought he'd stolen. Fourth, and this was Elizabeth's masterpiece, she'd quietly filed trademark applications in my personal name for Donovan Industries and every product brand we'd developed, filed them years ago, maintained them properly, paid all the fees. Marcus could claim ownership of the company, but he couldn't legally use the name without licensing it from me. Every contract he signed using Donovan Industries without my authorization would be voidable. Every client communicates, every invoice, every purchase order. His lawyers would eventually discover this, probably in about 3 weeks, when they did their due diligence after the transition. By then, the damage would be catastrophic. Fifth, Elizabeth had written escalation clauses into the shell company agreements. If Donovan Industries attempted to terminate or modify any of the leases for equipment, real estate, or IP, the penalty fees would equal 200% of the remaining contract value. Marcus would owe me more for breaking the agreements than he'd save. The genius of Elizabeth's work was that none of it was hidden. Every document was filed properly. Every structure was legal. Every provision was standard practice in corporate law. Marcus just never looked, never thought to question the architecture his father had built, assumed that ownership on paper meant control in reality. Elizabeth had told me once, "The best legal defense is the one your opponent doesn't know exists until it's already destroyed them." Marcus had walked into every trap, and I hadn't even sprung them yet. That was coming next. I watched my son spend money we hadn't earned yet, fire people who'd been loyal for decades, and give speeches about innovation, all while sitting in my chair, completely unaware it was all about to collapse. 24 hours after I signed those papers, Marcus moved into my office. Not gradually, not respectfully. He had maintenance remove my desk, the one I'd bought in 1985, solid oak, scarred with coffee rings and decades of contracts, and replace it with a glass and chrome monstrosity that probably cost more than my first year's revenue. He hung his Wharton diploma on the wall where my family photos had been. The message was clear. The old era was over. Within the first week, Marcus announced his modernization initiatives in a company-wide email. He cut 17 veteran employees, people who'd been with Donovan Industries for 15, 20, 30 years, told them the company was moving in a new direction, and their skill sets no longer aligned with our strategic vision. Translation: they were too old, too expensive, and they remembered when I ran things. He outsourced a third of our manufacturing to China, said it would optimize margins and increase shareholder value. Never mind that American-made was part of our brand, part of what our defense and aerospace clients specifically contracted for. He inflated executive salaries across the board, gave himself a $400,000 raise, made Vanessa COO at $350,000 annually for a woman who'd never worked a day in manufacturing, whose only qualification was being married to him. Vanessa redecorated the entire executive suite, $200,000 in renovations, new carpets, new furniture, new art on the walls. She hired a designer from New York who'd done work for tech startups in Silicon Valley. Our headquarters started looking like a Google office instead of a manufacturing company. The Pittsburgh Business Times ran a feature story, New Generation Leadership at Donovan Industries. There was Marcus on the cover, arms crossed, standing in front of our factory with a confident smile. The article barely mentioned me. One paragraph about founder Richard Donovan's 48-year legacy, buried on page 3. The rest was Marcus talking about innovation, disruption, bringing the company into the modern era. He bought a house in Sewickley Heights, $2.3 million, 6 bedrooms, pool, 3-car garage, bought Vanessa a Tesla Roadster for her birthday, posted photos on social media like some kind of celebrity, money we hadn't made yet, profits that depended on contracts he didn't understand and couldn't fulfill without me. 3 weeks after I signed, they threw me a retirement party, catered event in the main factory building. About 100 people showed up, some because they wanted to, most because Marcus expected them to. Marcus gave a speech, stood up there with a microphone, and talked about being grateful for Dad's foundation and excited to build on what he started and honored to carry the Donovan name into the future. He thanked me for teaching him the basics and giving him the opportunity to take things to the next level. The basics, like 48 years of building a $50 million company, was elementary school. People applauded politely. Some of the older workers had tears in their eyes. They knew what was happening. They knew this wasn't retirement. It was exile. I smiled, hugged my son when he came down from the podium, told him I was proud of him. He barely reciprocated, patted my back twice and moved on to shake hands with board members. I left early, said I was tired, let them think the old man couldn't handle a late night. In my car, my phone buzzed. Text from Harold. 3 weeks. I smiled and drove home. The look on Marcus's face when he realized he'd been outplayed by the declining old man he'd tried to force into retirement, that's a memory I'll treasure forever. 3 weeks and 2 days after my retirement party, mid-October 2023, Marcus received an official notice. Emergency board meeting, called by DI Holdings LLC, majority shareholder of Donovan Industries. Mandatory attendance, 10 a.m., Thursday. Marcus had never heard of the entity. I know this because Harold told me Marcus spent 2 days having his assistant search corporate records, demanding explanations from David Fisher, calling contacts at the Delaware Secretary of State's office. Nobody could tell him anything useful. Thursday morning, Marcus arrived at the boardroom 10 minutes early, probably thought he'd control the space, set the tone, handle whatever administrative problem this was. I was already there, seated at the head of the table, my chair. Harold sat to my right, Elizabeth Warren to my left. 2 additional corporate attorneys I'd brought from Elizabeth's firm flanked the sides, and in the corner, a court stenographer with recording equipment, Richard Stokes, Jennifer Yamamoto, and Thomas Brennan. The 3 board members Marcus had bought sat together looking confused and worried. William Garrett and Susan Chen, The 2 board members who'd been loyal to me all along sat calmly with notepads. Marcus stopped in the doorway, stared at me, at the attorneys, at the stenographer. "What is this?" His voice was steady, but I saw his jaw tighten. "This is a properly called board meeting," Elizabeth said. "Please sit down, Mr. Donovan." He sat. Vanessa wasn't there. She had no official role yet, despite Marcus's promises. Elizabeth opened a folder. Solid copies of documents across the table to each board member. These materials outline the corporate ownership structure of Donovan Industries, which several of you seem to have misunderstood. She walked through it methodically. DI Holdings, LLC, the family trusts, the shell companies, the actual ownership breakdown showing my controlling 51% interest through entities Marcus had never known existed. Then she detailed the poison pill provisions, how Marcus's attempt to force my retirement had triggered automatic conversion of his shares and the shares of any board members who'd participated. Marcus's 30% had become 3% non-voting preferred stock. Richard, Jennifer, and Thomas had each lost 85% of their equity value. Additionally, Elizabeth continued, her voice calm and professional, Mr. Marcus Donovan's contracts as president were executed without proper authorization from the majority shareholder. Those contracts are void. She slid another document across the table. Trademark registrations. Everyone in my name personally. Any use of the Donovan Industries name, logo, or product brands without written authorization from Richard Donovan constitutes trademark infringement. Marcus's face had gone from confident to confused to pale. The equipment leases, real estate agreements, and intellectual property licenses that allow Donovan Industries to operate are held by entities controlled by Richard Donovan. Termination or modification of these agreements carries penalty fees of 200% of remaining contract value. Elizabeth looked directly at Marcus. You cannot legally operate this company without your father's consent. The room was silent except for the court stenographer's typing. Elizabeth continued. Richard Stokes, Jennifer Yamamoto, and Thomas Brennan violated their fiduciary duty by participating in a conspiracy to remove the company's founder through fraudulent means. Their positions on this board are terminated effective immediately. The 3 of them started to protest. Elizabeth held up her hand. You're welcome to pursue legal action. I encourage it. Discovery will be fascinating. They shut up. Elizabeth turned to the remaining board members, Harold, William, Susan, and me. I move that Marcus Donovan be removed as president of Donovan Industries for cause, that Richard Donovan be restored as chairman of the board, and that Harold Chen be appointed chief executive officer. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Mine, Harold's, William's, Susan's. Unanimous. Motion passes. Marcus found his voice. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll take this to court. Elizabeth smiled. Actually smiled. Try. She stood up, collected her documents. The attorneys followed her out. The stenographer packed up her equipment. I stayed seated. I looked at my son. Harold will handle the transition. Clean out your office by the end of business today. Marcus stared at me. Disbelief. Rage. Something that might have been fear. Then he laughed. I'd taught my son everything about building a business. I'd failed to teach him about character, and that failure cost him everything. After the others left, I asked Marcus to stay. He stood by the door, hands in his pockets, looking at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe we both were. Sit down, I said. I'd rather stand. Sit down, Marcus. He sat, but his posture was rigid, defensive. We were alone in that boardroom, just father and son, except we weren't really. We were adversaries, and I'd won. You want to explain this? His voice was controlled, but I heard the anger underneath. You manipulated everything, set me up, played me. I protected what I built, I said. There's a difference. You let me think I had a chance. You watched me take over, make plans, and you knew the whole time. I knew you'd try to force me out, I said. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. But I knew your character, Marcus. I've known it for a long time. My character. He laughed, bitter. You're the one who built a maze of shell companies and legal traps. You remember your junior year at Wharton? I asked. When you called and said you'd been suspended for a week because of a misunderstanding with a professor? He went still. I called the dean. I continued. You weren't suspended for a disagreement. You were suspended for plagiarizing a case study. The school gave you a second chance because I donated $100,000 to their scholarship fund. Marcus looked away. 2 years after you joined Donovan Industries, you fired Amanda Richardson. Remember her? Accounts receivable. Pregnant with her second child. You terminated her 3 weeks before she qualified for extended maternity leave. She was underperforming. Her numbers were fine. Harold showed me. You fired her because you wanted to hire Vanessa's friend and needed to open a position. That's business, Marcus said. That's cruelty, I replied. And it told me who you were becoming. I leaned forward. You used to talk about Harold behind his back, called him outdated, made jokes about his accent, told board members he was past his prime and holding the company back. This man who'd been loyal to me, to us, for decades. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I gave you the president role because I wanted to believe I was wrong about you. I wanted to think that responsibility would bring out your better nature, that you'd prove my instincts were just an old man's paranoia. I shook my head. Instead, you spent 5 years planning how to take everything from me. You falsified documents, forged my signature, bribed board members, built a case against me using lies and manipulation. You taught me to plan, Marcus said, to think strategically, to protect my interests. I taught you to build something that lasts, to treat people fairly, to earn loyalty instead of buying it. I stood up. I walked to the window, looked out at the factory floor below, machines running, workers moving with purpose. The new reality is this, I said, not turning around. You're terminated. Your shares are worthless. You're removed from my will. Everything goes to Harold and a trust for your children's education, including Jake. I heard him inhale sharply. You can keep whatever you've already bought. The house, the cars, whatever Vanessa hasn't taken yet, but you will never touch Donovan Industries again. I turned to face him. You're my son. I'll always love you, but I don't respect you, and I don't trust you. You chose this path. Marcus stood. His face was a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. Anger, certainly. Maybe hurt. Maybe just the realization that he'd miscalculated badly. You could have just retired gracefully, he said quietly. Let me run the company. Been proud of me. I would have been proud, I said, if you'd earned it honestly, if you'd waited, if you'd asked instead of plotted, if you'd shown even a fraction of the character Harold Chen shows every single day. Marcus walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. Was any of it real? Did you ever actually trust me? I wanted to, I said. That's the tragedy, Marcus. I desperately wanted to. He left without another word. I stood in that empty boardroom for a long time, looking at the chair he'd vacated. I'd won. The company was safe. Justice was served. But I'd lost my son. Both things were true. Harold proved what I'd always believed. Leadership isn't about pedigree or business school credentials. It's about character and dedication to something bigger than yourself. Harold's first day as CEO, he showed up at 5:30 in the morning. Not to make a statement, that's just who he was. He spent that first week visiting all 3 facilities personally. Not conference room meetings with managers. Floor time. He walked every production line, shook hands with every worker he could find, asked questions about equipment, about processes, about what Marcus had changed and what needed fixing. The workers loved him. They'd always respected Harold. But this was different. This was their guy. Someone who'd started where many of them started, who understood manufacturing from the inside out. Harold's first major decision, bring the manufacturing back from China. It took 6 months and cost us short-term margin, but he made it happen. Renegotiated contracts, brought equipment back online, rehired 9 of the 17 people Marcus had laid off. The ones who'd found other jobs, he called personally to apologize and wish them well. He restored the salary cuts Marcus had imposed on senior machinists, implemented profit-sharing programs that tied bonuses to company performance, started apprenticeship programs to train young workers in precision manufacturing. Within 90 days, production efficiency increased 18%, not through intimidation or corporate restructuring, through people actually giving a damn again. Harold attended every board meeting prepared with detailed reports, financial projections, operational updates, but he also made decisions with a moral compass Marcus had never possessed. When one of our longtime employees had a medical emergency, heart surgery with inadequate insurance, Harold authorized the company to cover the difference, $30,000. He didn't ask the board's permission first, did it, then reported it. Nobody objected. The company culture transformed. People started staying late, not because they were forced to, but because they cared about the work again. The fear Marcus had created, the sense that everyone was expendable, disappeared. I attended monthly board meetings, offered advice when Harold asked for it. Otherwise, stayed out of his way. I started playing golf on Wednesdays, took Sarah on the vacation to Ireland we'd postponed for 40 years, spent time with my grandson Jake, teaching him the things his father should have learned but never did. I watched Harold run the company better than I'd run it in my final years. That's not false modesty. It's true. Harold brought fresh energy while maintaining the principles we'd built together. He modernized where it made sense, preserved tradition where it mattered. Our clients noticed. Several commented that the company felt more responsive, more innovative, more reliable than it had in years. Revenue increased 14% in Harold's first year, 22% in the second year. He did what Marcus never could have done. He made Donovan Industries stronger while honoring what it had always been. This was the legacy I'd actually wanted, not my name on the door being the only thing that mattered, but the values I'd built with fairness, quality, loyalty, treating people with dignity, surviving and thriving. Harold embodied all of that, and watching him lead, I realized something I should have understood earlier. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Harold was my brother in every way that mattered. Marcus lost the company, his wife, his reputation, and his inheritance, but the thing he could never get back was his father's respect, and I think he finally understands that was worth more than all of it. The Sewickley Heights mansion went into foreclosure within 8 months. Marcus had over-leveraged everything. The mortgage was based on his Donovan Industries salary and projected bonuses that would never materialize. When the income disappeared, the house of cards collapsed. Vanessa filed for divorce 2 months after the emergency board meeting. She'd married Marcus Donovan, future CEO of a $50 million company. She had no interest in Marcus Donovan, unemployed executive with worthless stock certificates and mounting debt. The divorce was quick and brutal. Pennsylvania is an equitable distribution state. She took half of what little remained, the cars, some savings, whatever equity was left after the mansion sale. Marcus's Wharton network abandoned him just as quickly. When you're the golden boy, everyone wants to know you. When you're the cautionary tale, phone calls go unreturned. LinkedIn messages sit unread. The connections that seemed so solid when he was powerful evaporated when he was just another guy who'd screwed up. He found work eventually, VP of operations at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Cleveland. Solid company, good products, revenue around $12 million annually, nothing close to what he'd tasted at Donovan Industries. I heard through mutual contacts that Marcus blamed everyone, blamed me for being manipulative, blamed Harold for being disloyal, blamed Elizabeth for being too clever, blamed the board members for not standing up for him, never blamed himself, never acknowledged that maybe forging signatures and fabricating medical records wasn't standard business practice. I never spoke to Marcus again after that confrontation in the boardroom, never called, never reached out, sent formal communication through attorneys when necessary, but otherwise maintained complete silence. Harold kept me informed, not because I asked. He just understood I'd want to know my son wasn't starving in the street even if I couldn't forgive what he'd done. Marcus has 2 children, Jake, who's now 20, and a daughter, Emily, who's 16. I'd lost touch with both of them during Marcus's presidency, when he'd started limiting my access to his family. Jake turned 18 about a year after the coup, late 2024. I reached out to him directly, took him to lunch, told him I wanted a relationship with him that didn't involve his father. Jake was cautious at first. Marcus had poisoned him against me, told him I was vindictive and cruel. But Jake was smart. He'd watched what happened. He'd seen his father's mansion foreclosed, his mother leave. His family's name became something people whispered about. We started meeting regularly, just the 2 of us. I told him stories about building the company, about his great-grandfather, about making choices that align with your character. Jake is nothing like his father. He's studying mechanical engineering at Penn State, works part-time as a machinist's apprentice, saves his money, talks about building things, creating value, earning respect. I told him there's a place for him at Donovan Industries when he's ready. Not handed to him, earned. He smiled and said that's exactly what he wanted. Maybe that's the real legacy. Not Marcus, not even the company itself, but a second chance to teach someone what really matters before it's too late. I spent 48 years building an empire, but I learned the hardest lesson in a single afternoon. Sometimes protecting what you've built means protecting it from the people you love most. There are things I'd do differently if I could go back. I'd trust my instincts about Marcus earlier. I saw the signs when he was 25, 30, the small cruelties, the entitled attitude, the way he treated people he considered beneath him. I told myself it was immature, that he'd grow out of it, that unconditional love from a father would teach him character. It didn't. Love doesn't change someone who doesn't want to change. It just gives them power to hurt you more deeply. I'd listened to Harold when he first warned me. Instead of defending Marcus, instead of making excuses, I'd acknowledge that someone who'd known my son as an adult professional might see things more clearly than I did as his father. But I'd keep the safeguards, all of them, not because I'm paranoid, because I've learned the hard way that hoping for the best while preparing for the worst isn't cynicism, it's wisdom. Build your corporate structure right. Protect your assets. Don't assume blood means loyalty. If someone loves you and respects you, these protections will never matter. They'll never be triggered. They'll just sit there like insurance you never need. But if you're wrong about someone, if trust was misplaced, those safeguards are the difference between losing everything and keeping what you built. I spent years wanting both respect and love from Marcus. I got neither. Harold gave me respect earned through 4 decades of shared struggle. That turned out to be worth more than blood ever was. My biggest mistake wasn't building the shell companies or establishing the poison pills or creating the legal maze that protected my company. My biggest mistake was believing that biology guaranteed loyalty. It doesn't. Loyalty is earned through character, through showing up, through integrity when no one's watching, through sacrifice that expects nothing in return. Marcus thought he was entitled to my empire because he was my son. Harold inherited my respect because he earned it every single day. That's the difference between family and legacy. Family is an accident of birth. Legacy is what you build through your choices, your values, your treatment of others. I built Donovan Industries to last beyond my lifetime. It will, not because my son runs it, but because the principles I founded it on, fairness, quality, loyalty, treating people with dignity, survived even when my own son abandoned them. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for, that what you built outlives the people who tried to destroy it, and finds its way into hands worthy of holding it. A little over 2 years after I signed those retirement papers, the company is worth more, employs more people, and operates with more integrity than it ever did under Marcus's modern leadership. It's January 2026 now. Harold's been CEO for 3 years. Revenue hit $65 million last year, up from $50 million when Marcus tried his coup. We've opened a 4th facility, just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. State-of-the-art equipment. Hired 85 people in a region that desperately needed good manufacturing jobs. Employee retention is the highest in company history. People stay because they're treated well, paid fairly, and given opportunities to grow, not because they're trapped or afraid. Harold negotiated 3 major aerospace contracts personally. Our largest clients, Boeing, Lockheed, specifically requested meetings with him, said they appreciated working with someone who understood both the technical requirements and the importance of reliability. One purchasing manager told Harold directly, "We were worried when Marcus took over. We're relieved now that you're running things." Last year, Pittsburgh Business Times named Donovan Industries one of the best places to work in Western Pennsylvania, same publication that had put Marcus on the cover 3 years earlier. I cut out that article and framed it, hung it in my home office next to the photo from 1978, the circle of what actually matters. I attend quarterly board meetings. Harold sends me monthly financial summaries, but I'm not running the company anymore. I'm doing what I should have been doing all along, living my life. Sarah and I took that trip to Ireland, then Scotland, then spent a month driving through Montana because we'd always talked about it, but never gone. I play golf on Wednesdays with Harold and William Garrett. We don't talk much about business, mostly complain about our short games and tell stories about people we used to know. I spend a lot of time with my grandson, Jake. He's 20 now. He is studying mechanical engineering at Penn State, works summers on the factory floor at Donovan Industries, not in some executive intern position, but actually running machines, learning the craft from the ground up, same way I started. Last week, he came over for dinner, brought his girlfriend, a smart young woman studying computer science. After we ate, Jake and I sat in my office, and I taught him how to read a balance sheet. He asked good questions, took notes. I wanted to understand not just what the numbers meant, but why they mattered. That's when I felt it. Real pride. Not the forced optimism I'd felt watching Marcus, where I convinced myself everything was fine despite evidence to the contrary. Actual pride in someone who was building themselves into someone worth respecting. The company I built is in good hands, better hands than mine in some ways. Harold has the energy and vision to take it further than I could have, and the legacy I actually wanted, teaching someone how to build something meaningful, how to treat people fairly, how to earn respect through character. I'm getting that too, just with a different student than I'd expected. Sometimes that's how life works. You don't get what you planned for. You get what you actually deserve. If you've ever trusted the wrong person with something you built, if you've ever had to choose between love and protecting your legacy, you understand exactly why I'm telling this story. Let me speak to you directly. If you've built something meaningful, a business, a property portfolio, a farm, anything that represents decades of your work, protect it legally. Right now, today. Get an estate attorney, a good one. Not your cousin who does real estate closings. Build the corporate structures, set up the trusts, create the safeguards, and make sure your most trusted advisor isn't family. I'm not saying don't trust your children. I'm saying have someone else, someone with no emotional investment, who can tell you the truth you need to hear instead of the truth you want to believe. Harold saved me because he had the courage to warn me about my own son. The family wouldn't have done that. They'd have made excuses, hoped it worked out, worried about causing conflict. Harold just told me the truth. If you see character flaws in someone you're grooming for leadership, lying, cruelty, entitlement, treating people as disposable, believe what you see. Don't believe what you hope. Character doesn't change because you love someone. It doesn't improve because you give them opportunities. Either it's there or it isn't. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, has family ever betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? Did you see it coming and ignore the signs like I did? Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? I want to know I'm not alone in this, because that's the real reason I'm sharing this story. Not for revenge, not to humiliate Marcus, but to let other men know that if you've been betrayed by someone you loved, someone you sacrificed for, you're not crazy and you're not alone, and there's a way through it that preserves your dignity. I'm not bitter. I want you to understand that. I got the outcome that was right, just not the one I'd hoped for. There's a difference. Bitter means you lost, and you can't accept it. I won, and I accepted that the cost of winning was losing my son. Both things can be true. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about life lessons learned the hard way, about building things that last, about making hard decisions that turn out to be right. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone grooming their own replacement and ignoring red flags. Maybe someone who's already been betrayed and needs to know they can survive it. The greatest gift you can give someone isn't wealth or position or opportunity. It's teaching them how to earn respect, how to treat people with dignity, how to build character that lasts beyond your presence. I tried to give Marcus that gift. He refused it, but I'm giving it to Jake now, and he's accepting it. That's the difference between someone who deserves a legacy and someone who just wants the rewards without the responsibility. Know the difference. Act accordingly. Protect what you've built. Thank you for listening. I signed the papers just like my son demanded, but I'd learned a long time ago that preparation and patience will always defeat arrogance and impatience. Here's what Marcus taught me, even though he didn't mean to. You can give someone everything: education, opportunity, position, connections, money, but you can't give them character. That has to come from within. Either it's there or it isn't. I don't regret grooming Marcus for leadership. I regret ignoring the signs that he wasn't ready morally, only technically. He knew how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate contracts, how to present to a board, but he never learned why those things mattered beyond personal gain. He never understood that a company is built on trust. Trust from employees, from clients, from partners. And trust isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn every single day through consistent character. Last month, I sat with Jake in the same office where I'd confronted Marcus 3 years ago. We were working through financial statements from one of our major contracts. Jake looked up and asked, "Grandpa, why did you always pay above market rate for skilled machinists? Wouldn't lower labor costs increase profit?" I explained. Because good people are worth more than the money you save by hiring cheap. Because when you treat people right, they stay. And continuity is worth more than quarterly savings. He nodded, wrote it down. He gets it. Not because I told him, but because he's watched how Harold runs the company. Watch how employees respond to being valued. Seen the results of doing things right. That's character being taught through example, not lecture. Betrayal reveals truth. That's the lesson. Marcus's betrayal revealed his true character, and mine revealed Harold's loyalty, revealed which board members had integrity and which ones had a price, revealed that the empire I thought I'd built was less about buildings and machines and more about the principles those things represented. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it's always necessary. I signed those retirement papers exactly the way Marcus demanded. Trembling hand, defeated posture, confused questions. But I'd spent 15 years preparing for someone to challenge me, building structures they couldn't see, developing relationships they couldn't buy, creating safeguards they couldn't circumvent. That's the difference between reacting and preparing. Marcus reacted to his impatience, made a move when he felt ready. I prepared for every possibility, then waited until the right moment. Preparation and patience will always defeat arrogance and impatience. Always. Your legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you choose to leave it with. I chose Harold. I chose Jake. I chose people who earned the privilege through character, not people who demanded it through biology. That choice made all the difference. 3 years ago, my son looked me in the eyes and said, "Sign the papers, Dad. It's time to retire." I signed them. Just not the way he expected. And that's a lesson worth more than any empire I could have built.